Well, welcome to the Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield here on the Rural Radio Network. We took some time off on the road, and of course, I had knee surgery, but we are back at it once again. Brad Kooima joins us this week. A variety of different things happening. We can say pretty much the South is wrapped up on their cattle sales, but what about for the North? Are they holding them tight to the feedlot and want a little bit more cash? And how was the Thanksgiving processing going? We'll get all those details from Brad, along with a lot more things happening within this cattle industry. So I think we got to talk where we're at right now, Brad. You had mentioned to me before we started, the South pretty much is done with their cattle purchases.
I believe they are, and they had a pretty good go at it. First of all, thanks for having me on, and it's really good to have you back.
Thanks.
Yeah, heal up quickly, and hope that this works out good.
Thank you.
So yesterday, we had a nice rally. Market kind of was sloppy, 30, 40, 50 lower, just kind of listless, like it was not unusual for this time of year trade. And then all of a sudden the South started to come around. As you know, remember yesterday was a little early in the week to expect cash trade, but we ended up last week, we traded a few cattle at 155. Yesterday that we traded the show list at 155 in the South is how it felt to me. So I'd call the market fully steady, actually really maybe more like $1 higher on the kind. And you know, I think that's what encouraged the futures rally yesterday as well. So they're probably done for the week, like you said. Now the North hasn't hardly traded. There's been lots of bids. Last week we traded cattle for the most part at 157. At least that's what I got. I've been bid that again from 3 different packers. So far, we're deciding to pass to see if we can't get a little more. We feel like the packer needs a few cattle. Some of these packers getting a little closer to the knife too, as I know there's cattle that we sold here last week that are getting picked up today, which is a little better than it is sometimes. So I think there's still some enthusiasm for the market, particularly if you've got the kind of cattle that might grade. You know, choice select spread, again, we haven't talked about that for a while, but wow, it's almost $30 again. So you can still see that a packer is still chasing the grade and trying to find some cattle that will grade. And those cattle generally are up here in the North, not down there in the South.
Did it surprise you, the numbers that came in from the Thanksgiving week trade on processing?
That's a great question. And to say surprised hardly even begins to describe it. So they revised the slaughter. So every day you get estimated slaughter, right? The packer says, yeah, I think we killed 5,200 at this plant and 3,100 at that plant, and yada, yada. And then about a week later, typical, right, that it takes that long to count the cattle, which of course is complete baloney, because anybody that sold cattle knows that you get a check based on number of head, times what they weighed, times what they paid for them. It's really not complicated at all. Anyway, and the weights aren't complicated either. There's no reason we wait for 13 days. Sorry, on my soapbox. So they revised the week slaughter, the week of Thanksgiving, up by 15,000 head. Crazy. And what that ended up with, then with the total, that was the highest Thanksgiving week slaughter since 2006. So, you know, some of the chatter, we may talk about this in a minute, from the packer complaining about is, you know, poor them. They don't have very good margins. And that they're thinking about cut and kill. Maybe they will tomorrow, but they certainly haven't done it here today or last week. That's for sure.
When you talk about these poor processing margins for them, what is their magic number that they're looking at?
$1,100 a head. No, just kidding. That's what it was for a while, right? You know, depending on how you do the math and who you believe exactly. And it depends if you're fully, you know, if you're like one of the big four that has an ability to, you know, merchandise everything, including the tails and the ears and the oxbows and the stuff you've never heard about, right? Their procurement cost probably a little less than someone that is, you know, as a fabricator, for instance. But I would suppose that with the up in the cash and the down in the beef a little bit, you know, that their margins are pretty tight. That's not the first time that's happened this time of year. Right on the back heels of Thanksgiving, typically this is when everybody complains about the same thing. You know, got to have some beef cleanup. And, you know, we're not quite into that ribeye prime rib season yet, you know, that they would do for the Christmas and the New Year deal. This is very normal. In fact, there's a strong seasonal to buy live cattle a week before my birthday. My birthday is December 15. Okay. Yep. So I believe that the seasonal book this year is December 9 is what the suggestion is. So one has to be careful with seasonals. Of course, they're limited in their scope. But still, this is, you know, from this, I would be very careful about now deciding that now there's time to be bearish We're at 157 in December cattle are 152.85. It's December. Feb cattle are 155.20. Typically, we'd have a weather. What if we have bad weather? We'd have a premium built into there, not be trading at a discount. So let's keep everybody worried. Let's keep everybody current. We're fine. I like the market. I like the way it feels a lot, to be honest with you.
Well, let's talk about the weather because we've had for the most part a pretty mild winter, fall so far. It's obviously gotten some snow and colder temperatures, but how are we doing weight wise on these cattle, knowing what they were growing leading up to this colder snap?
Now, it's a good question, and it's part of the if you wanted to, every morning there's good news and bad news, right? If you wanted to pull out the good news pile or the bad news pile in this case, I would say it's the average weights, and I don't think they're big. They're more than a week ago and more than a year ago by a little bit. And I don't think it's because you've got a feedlot producer that's stubbornly hanging on to cattle, fighting the market. I think the cost of gain is too high to have much enthusiasm for that. And plus, these cattle make a little bit of money. Usually, that's help, incentivizes people to sell it. But I think the reason is like you just said, the weather. We've had a stretch here where they haven't even had moisture on their back, and they've done it all. And I think anybody that you talk to would agree that performances have been better than expected, and so then the weight is better than expected. It's interesting to me, not being a nutritionist, but it looks like even though the cattle weigh more, we're still kind of chasing this grade deal. The grade has improved a little, but not like you might have thought it would. So yeah, now I'm, to say that the weather is, cattle are dying or something looking out the window. I don't mean to imply that. I know better, but it was 3 degrees here in Northwest Iowa. We got 4 inches of snow. It's blowing around. I think you got to the point where, okay, this 4.5 pound a day thing gain is probably over now. We've got winter. It's going to warm up tomorrow. We're going to have mud. So we start this cycle of moisture and mud, hopefully, and at least from a crop standpoint. So I would say that the weights may take care of themselves from the standpoint of this really superior gains probably will slow down.
Well, one final question, and maybe it's just kind of more livestock in general. But as we continue to see this whole COVID lockdown and the protesting that's happening out of China, how is that weighing just on proteins in general here in the States?
I think some participants in the market are getting numb to the China COVID stuff because it's from one day to the next. It's unpredictable. The information we get out of there is unreliable. Is that a polite word?
Yeah.
It's hard to, trust that we're hearing the full story. But you asked a question, I'm going to give a hard answer. I think that generally speaking, this is going to keep things a little bit on a negative tone. It doesn't appear as though the Chinese government cares at all about what's going on from the standpoint of protests or anything else. They've done nothing really to significantly change their COVID policies other than a little bit of lip service about 3 weeks ago, and then really nothing's changed. So I don't know. The hogs are having a nice day today, but keep an eye on some of this other stuff like cotton and things like that. Those are a pretty good harbinger of what our business like is with them. So it's not terrible, but I don't think you can count on China to be the big white horse rescue here to solving this protein thing.
All right, lots of things that we looked at. Hopefully next week we bring some higher cash numbers.
I'm with you. Good to see you back.
Thank you so much. Brad Kooima has been joining us for this week's Cattle Call. And as we always remind you, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's been this week's Cattle Call on the Rural Radio Network.